Good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining us for our government-only TIC demonstration series. Today, we will be hearing from our partners at AttackIQ. I would like to go ahead and introduce our presenters. Today, we have Stacy Meyer. She is the VP of Federal Operations at AttackIQ. And we will also be hearing from Jason Mueller. He is the Solutions Architect for the U.S. public sector at AttackIQ. If you guys have any questions, please be sure to ask them in the Q&A chat, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Over to you, Stacy.
Thank you, Kirsten, and Happy New Year, everyone. We appreciate you taking the time today to come and join ATARC and AttackIQ and learning how we can assist agencies in further pursuing TIC 3.0 initiatives through planning of security optimization with AttackIQ. Let me share my presentation and we'll get started. Are you able to see the presentation screen, Kirsten?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Thank you guys again for joining us. So AttackIQ, we are a continuous security validation platform. We are defined by Gartner in the category of breach and attack simulation. However, we prefer to think of ourselves more as a breach and attack emulation tool. And we'll talk a little bit more about why emulation versus simulation is a distinctive quality. So let's get started. Our main goal at AttackIQ is to help organizations validate their security effectiveness. You've made significant investments in your security infrastructure, but how do you measure if those controls are working for you the way they should? Usually, organizations don't realize they have a problem until there's a breach or attack or something has been alerted in their infrastructure. When you look at the fact that organizations spend billions of dollars annually in cybersecurity and companies are still unknown and in the dark on whether they're protected, it leaves a lot of questions to be desired. So our goal at AttackIQ is to help organizations not only decrease expenditures on cybersecurity, but to bridge the gap and be more proactive in getting ahead of the adversary. Adversaries are keeping pace, expenditures are going up, but they keep on keeping track of us. So let's start to get ahead of them and be more proactive. If you're familiar with the Verizon DIBA report, we have participated in assisting with the evaluation of the assessment of the previous year's assessments for the last 4 years. This will be our 5th year participating with Verizon. And we've seen year over year, approximately 82% of all of the breaches that are occurring should have been stopped with the controls the organization had deployed, but they weren't. There was no detection or prevention. And we call that a protection failure. Now, this is where it's the distinction between emulation versus simulation comes into play. If the majority of the breaches occurring annually are from misconfigurations and protection failures of your existing tools, you can't simulate a misconfiguration in a stovepiped or firewalled or lab environment. It's important to test your controls in production environments and live experiences that do no harm to your production deployment.
Hey, Stacy, do you want to switch the view?
Oh, thank you. Is that better?
Good to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. All right, so at AttackIQ, this is a little bit about our solution. I'll spend a few minutes on this slide, but we're going to start at the top of the pyramid and work our way down. So AttackIQ is a 100% software subscription. We are a distributed client server deployment, and we have 2 components that we license: the management console and our distributed agent network. The management console comes in 2 flavors. We have a hosted SaaS cloud version as well as an on-premise version. The on-premise version is in the form of an OVA, a virtual appliance. The OVA can be deployed on a VM in a federated cloud environment. Unfortunately, we are not FedRAMP today. That is something we have on our roadmap, but it has not been a showstopper for government because of the OVA being a virtual appliance. The distributed agent network are our test points. Now, those are distributed across the various operating systems and endpoints in your environment. We support all flavors of Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X. Once you distribute a sampling size across the various operating systems, we deploy a test point in the user space. It can be deployed unbeknownst to the end user, and it's a service offering that gets deployed in the user space of the operating system itself. We then have the agent, which is a sleeper node, check home every 3 minutes to the management console to see if it has work to do. The work is assigned to them in the form of scenarios. The scenarios are known adversarial tactics, techniques, and procedures that an adversary would use to gain a foothold, make initial access, move laterally, exfiltrate data, and gain command and control of your infrastructure. Our scenario library today has over 2,200 different techniques that you can execute against your infrastructure. Now, that may seem like a lot to digest and figure out where to start in running assessments against your environment. Well, we've made it easy by creating a filter set. So you're able to filter by specific APTs, tactics that align to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, by operating system, or even do a field search on what you're trying to accomplish. Additionally, we've taken it a step further to create templates. A template is a grouping of scenarios to accomplish a specified action, such as a specific APT in the news today. For example, Iranian threat actors. If you're interested in understanding how you would fare out if you were targeted by the Iranian threat actors, then you could then run the Iranian threat actor template, which has mapped all of the scenarios in our platform that align with APT 33, APT 39, oil rig, and muddy water. And then you can immediately generate results and see how you would fare out. And then for every single scenario we run, for every phase of the attack, we give you visibility into the exact line of source code that was executed, and then provide mitigation recommendations for every phase of the attack that you can then implement from a remediation perspective, and then rerun the AttackIQ scenario to see if those mitigations were successful. Additionally, we're an open platform. What does that mean? You have access to the source code for every single one of our 2,200 plus scenarios. You have the ability to manipulate and customize the scenarios on our platform, as well as write your own custom scenarios. You can also add custom tagging for the filter searching, and you can also create custom templates. You can take a template we've created and add and modify or remove scenarios that may have been mapped to it today, or create a completely new scenario template. We also have integrations to check those security controls that you have deployed in your environment. We have a security exchange that we work with called the Preactive Security Exchange. We volunteer our source code and then work intimately with other companies that you have deployed in your infrastructure to assess that they are in fact preventing and detecting the malicious activity that's being executed. So we have a deep dive relationship and a great partnership with a lot of the different manufacturers that you'll see in your infrastructure. Aside from that, if we don't have a direct integration today, it could be on our roadmap to be released in the future, but that's still not going to be a showstopper because we are API forward. So you're able to leverage the API and create your own integrations, or you can leverage your SIM tool. Last but not least, we have a community that we allow our users to participate in. You're able to share best practices, things that you're seeing in your environment with others in our community. You're also able to garner information from other commercial verticals across the AttackIQ community. And then once you run the scenarios, all the data is fed back to the management console, and then you can analyze the data in the form of reports or visual graphical representation. And we have a lot of different ways that you can look at the data. Jason will show you this in our live demo. We also have reports built into the platform. So you're able to run a scenario, run an assessment or a template of assessments, generate a report at either a very high level to send up to management as a summary to say, these are the techniques we ran, and this is our results, and this is our scorecard, and these are the mitigation plans we plan to implement to improve that security posture. You could also look at it from a deep dive technical report perspective. And that is really valuable when you have an organization, red team, blue team, where a red team will come in, leverage AttackIQ to automate the basic techniques in their playbook, giving them the ability to do more in the time they have with your infrastructure, and then allow the blue team to generate or to take the report from the deep dive technical to see a prioritization by AttackIQ of which remediations they should focus on first, and providing those mitigation recommendations for every phase of the attack. Once they implement the mitigations, they can then rerun those scenarios exactly as the red team did to ensure that they were successful. So in summary, basically, you choose either cloud or on-premise management platform, deploy that in your environment, assign and deploy the various test engines across your endpoints, supporting all the major operating systems again, and then assign the scenarios and assessments. You can schedule those to run on a reoccurring basis, and that's what we recommend. We want to help you baseline your infrastructure, fine-tune those controls, and then schedule the assessments to run on a reoccurring basis. You can choose hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly. And then you can be notified near real time as if there's any deviation to that baseline. And then generate the results through various reporting on the protection failures identified. I did mention a little bit about MITRE ATT&CK tactics. We have aligned and partnered with the MITRE ATT&CK framework by operationalizing those adversarial behaviors. We are a founding member in the MITRE Ingenuity Center for Threat Informed Defense, and we work actively with MITRE and the Center for Threat Informed Defense to enhance and grow the MITRE ATT&CK framework to do more for the common good. And you can see in the background of this slide that when we run a scenario, you can display the results visually in the form of the MITRE ATT&CK framework in a heat map. Now you can visualize and ascertain the least path of resistance an adversary would take to traverse your infrastructure from initial access to command and control. It's also a great way for you to identify where you might have gaps in your security infrastructure and maybe make a business case for where you need to make investments in additional tools to support those gaps. Additionally, AttackIQ is really big on the concept of purple teaming. In fact, we have AttackIQ Academy, which is free training courses that you can take to better understand more about the MITRE ATT&CK framework, breach and attack simulation as a category and a whole, and purple teaming. They're 100% free, and you can receive ISC2 CP credits for taking those classes. But we want to create a complete OODA loop of cohesive working relationships between the red team and the blue team to have a complete purple team operations. And we provide you the ability to execute that through the form of blueprints. And I'll talk about that in a minute. With the MITRE ATT&CK framework alignment, we can now help you automate your security validation across your entire organization and various business lines. This slide highlights 26 different use cases that we can support today. And you can see that under testing and audits is the automated testing for a red team, blue team, and purple team. That's where most people come to us looking to accomplish that specific use case. However, with an investment in AttackIQ, you're able to then pivot and support all of these other use cases at no additional cost to you. The capabilities are already prevalent and ready to execute in our platform. We go a step further to help you optimize your entire security operation through blueprints. And a blueprint is just what the name implies. It's a step-by-step building block to help you say, you want to automate your testing, well, you need to execute this specific step through all the way through the blueprint and ultimately build your house and put the roof on. And you can see in phase one, that's automated testing. And we have within phase one, several different validations that blueprints. We can then help you move into a more threat-informed defense operation of understanding your organization, and then move into a defensive threat emulation posture with exercise enablement, rationalization, and compliance dashboarding, ultimately moving you into an overarching, organized, security optimized infrastructure in a phase 4. So we're really excited about the idea of giving you the blueprints to help you be successful in executing an entire security optimized infrastructure across all your different business lines and units with the one deployment of AttackIQ. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Mueller, our Federal Solutions Architect, to talk a little bit about the AttackIQ architecture.
All right, thanks, Stacey. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
All right, good to go. So here at AttackIQ, we live by two main mantras, if you will, right? The first and most important is do no harm. And second to that is mean time to value, right? And the way that we're able to accomplish such is first and foremost, like Stacey had mentioned, is deploying our test agent into user space. So we're truly trying to act as if the adversary has gained a foothold onto the system, but does not have escalated privileges, if you will. So from a operating system support perspective, Windows, Mac OS, Linux as well, you'll see this is by no means a static list. However, you will see on a quarterly basis as we start to provide supportability, more so across the Linux side of the house. But just for food for thought for those that are listening in right now, as far as major operating systems are concerned, we typically wait for the first minor release to come out with regards to that operating system, that major release, just so that the OS vendor themselves can squash any bugs, et cetera. On top of that, like I said, our agent is running in user space. So that allows us to accomplish a couple different things, one of which, like I mentioned, we are not operating as an escalated user. However, we do reside in system space, right? So we do have the ability to execute assessments or templates, if you will, from that of a managed privileges perspective, meaning that you can act as a particular persona in the event that you're doing CI/CD provisioning. Before I provision a user and give them access onto my system, let me emulate adversarial behavior as if I am that user to make sure that there are GPO policies in place, there's prevention, detection methodologies or capabilities put in place to identify any sort of nefarious behavior. One thing to mention though is all of our scenarios are derived from Python, right? So we have a common language across the board. They're all Python derived. And the way that we initiate these is we push down the scenarios from the platform down to the endpoints themselves. Now, this is based on a reverse connection. All of the communication is outbound only from our endpoints back up to the platform, of which is TLS encrypted over 443. So once we run through a scenario is defined within a set time to live that is configurable by way of the user themselves, meaning that by default, we will not run longer than 2 minutes per scenario. So it kind of gives you a sense as to, when we talk about having 2,000 plus scenarios in the library, obviously you're gonna, tailor that down based upon your specific use case, or ultimately use some of the templates that we provide you out of the box, thereby going back to what I mentioned before, mean time to value. How quickly can we get up and running and actually get empirical data feeding back into our platform? So that being said, we'll run through a set of scenarios. We'll pass that telemetry back up into the platform. And then from there, we'll also initiate a cleanup script, thereby leaving the endpoint back to its original state. Now, granted, we're not doing anything from a malicious standpoint, right? These are all post-breach, living off the land. Can I execute PowerShell, WMI scripts? Can I start to move laterally, scrape credentials, things of that nature? Right. The luxury that we have in doing these 2-week sprints and updating the content within the library is that we're not playing whack-a-mole, right? We're not looking for that initial malware breach per se, because we know that the adversary is going to get a foothold onto your system, regardless of whether they're using malware or stolen credentials. So we operate from that post-breach mentality. Now, if we take a step back here with regards to the architecture, you do not have to deploy us with any integrations in place, and I'll get to that in a second. Meaning that if you simply want to understand the baseline of your operating system, once you've hardened, put GPO policies in place, you can start to run through scenarios within the AttackIQ platform to assess just that. Now, if you want to take a step further, and albeit 99.9% of our customers do, they start to leverage the integration side of the house, right? So once we start to understand whether or not a Python scenario is able to execute and not be prevented on the endpoint itself that we're running this against, then that's where we utilize our integration manager. And that allows us to have deeply rooted technology integrations with a lot of the major players that you see here: Silence, Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, et cetera. Right, so that allows us to identify from a prevention detection standpoint whether or not our security stack is capable of collecting and identifying whether or not there's malicious behavior taking place. And this is all built on the foundation, like Stacy had mentioned, of a common framework, that being MITRE ATT&CK, right? So these are post-breach scenarios. They're widely documented. And when we run through these adversarial emulation scenarios by way of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, we're expecting that we should get some sort of event or alert being generated. So that's the security stack side of the house from integration, but more importantly, the SIM integration, right? So understanding that the warfighter, the operators, the SOC analysts, the CERT analysts that are manning the watch 24/7 are typically using a SIM to conduct daily operations, giving them that single pane of glass. So in that case, we also have the ability to funnel these events over to your SIM. So we can start to correlate, aggregate, and really understand if we did have an alert from a credential harvesting exercise that came across, pick any one of our next-gen endpoint vendors, how long did that actually take to get to our SIM, right? So we're doing a lot of things here. We're understanding control validation, whether or not there's proper detection and prevention in place, but more so we're also showcasing from a workflow perspective or an SLA aspect, how long is it taking for that alert to actually generate within our SIM? The key thing here to point out is this is all fully open, right? So this is, you see the REST API there on the right-hand side. This is RESTful API based. The entire UI within the platform is derived from our API. And anything that you want to do outside of that, we also have a very well documented API guide that will allow you to do more so than what you're just able to do within the platform itself. So that's all I have on the architecture, Stacey, and I'll go ahead and share out my screen here and we'll move on to the demo.
Real quick, we have our contact information available. So when you have access to the slides at the end of the presentation, you can reach out to us if you have any specific questions you don't feel comfortable asking on this forum. We provided both our email address and our phone numbers.
All right, good to go, Stacey?
Yep, good to go.
All right, so like I mentioned, everything's web UI based. So regardless if you're deploying on-premise or from a SaaS-based approach, accessing the platform is going to be through web UI. In doing such, username, password. However, we do have enterprise features such as single sign-on through SAML integration. We have two-factor authentication as well. So if we would really want to further restrict who has access to some of the data and the telemetry that's being funneled back into the system, we can do so. In fact, we also have extensive RBAC controls that allow you to restrict who can view each individual assessment, not just restrict access to the platform itself. But if we go back and start from the fact that we've gone through, we understand our infrastructure, we know where we want to deploy, and now we have to get access to the actual installers themselves. It's as simple as navigating here on the left-hand side, going to our agent installers, and now starting to look at that more of a static list, if you will, as to what our supportability is here. Now, like I mentioned, this is user space that we deploy to. Everything is unbeknownst and to the end user and meant to be non-disruptive, right? So do no harm once again. In the event that you did want to deploy this outside of just a manual aspect, right? So I can pull down this installer here, compile it, and I can install it independently on each individual machine. But more so, I can take the silent install options and I can push this across from an enterprise perspective across SCCM, Tanium, BigFix, et cetera, right? And also having the ability here to do any sort of agent configuration, leading up to actual compile time here with regards to the installer. So if we know that there's a proxy associated, if we want to minimize or enhance the heartbeat interval, just to let us know that this asset is online, we can do so as well. And then any proxy information here, and then it'll take that configuration down with the installer itself and make sure that it maps to these parameters here that were inputted. Now, getting a holistic view as to what our current state looks like from a active assets versus total installed, this is key to point out, right? We're doing a snapshot in time. The assets that we have installed on, in this case, I have a machine that's offline, but I have 6 that are online. So a couple of different things that we'll walk through here. But the main takeaway is that when you are running an assessment and running through scenarios, the machines need to be online at the time of run. So we do not do any caching on the endpoint. You do not have to worry about a machine being offline for a week, 2 weeks, et cetera. And coming back online, then having a backlog of scenarios to run through, right? Another thing that we do here is we showcase detected technologies. So this is based on our technical partnerships. We have a sweeper that's associated with our agent itself, and it's looking for these services that are running on the endpoint and showcasing them in a way that, being visual folks that we are, it's just easy to better understand collectively what our makeup is if we have a disparate environment where we have multiple technologies. I can then take this data and I can create groups based on the detected technologies, based on the operating system themselves, the IP address space, subnet that it resides in, et cetera. But also more importantly too, when we look at what it is that we're collecting from an endpoint perspective, obviously we're looking at the audit logs that are associated, what was being ran on the specific endpoint. But here's more of the fingerprinting that takes place. The last heartbeat, the NetBIOS name. You see all the metadata here that we're taking, but also the network info. Right. So when we get into the likes of being able to do PCAP replay, right? So we start to understand running PCAP replay across maybe different VLAN segments. Right now, we're starting to associate network info here that'll help you in your decision-making process, what assets that you're going to select in order to achieve such. Another thing to showcase here too is the ability to quickly deploy. So I showcase the ability to pull down the installer, but also being able to go in and quickly restart, reset, or uninstall that agent. So we've often come across customers that are looking to accomplish audit from a remote perspective as we are operating in this new world of telework. Right, so being able to not necessarily have to have hands on the machine itself, we can deploy, we can run through a set of scenarios, and then we can reset, restart, or uninstall that agent as well. And then finally here, you see the disable all scenario activity. So this is literally a kill switch in the event that real world situation takes precedence. You have the ability to go in here and disable all scenario activity, thereby killing off any AttackIQ scenarios that are running. So that's the fun stuff. Now that we've got our agents deployed, we have them reporting back in. Now it's time to actually run through some assessments. And this is where I was talking with regards to mean time to value. How quickly can we deploy, get up and running, and now start to utilize what it is that AttackIQ has built for us from a threat intelligence standpoint, maybe from a compliance aspect, or a MITRE ATT&CK framework perspective. So what we have here is we have templates that are made up of scenarios. So those scenarios, once again, 2,000 plus scenarios, all map back for the most part back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. However, if we want to further segregate this and really understand what it is we're trying to accomplish based on use cases, we can go into any one of these template types, and I can start to look through any one of these templates that AttackIQ has provided out of the box. So the supply chain compromise, better known as SolarWinds, obviously we're not calling that for a reason. The red team toolkit theft, a set of IOCs and TTPs associated with the red team toolkit theft based on FireEye. The CrowdStrike global threat reports, right? This is publicly available information that we've taken, we've codified, and we've turned into templates. So if I pick any one of these, I can create a new template from it. But if I just want to look at the details here associated, right, it tells you exactly what it is based on the description. It shows how we've outlined these in individual control tests, as well as the scenarios that are associated here. So in this case, like I said, once again, this is a template that we can take, we can build upon, we can take away, but it just really alleviates any mundane or cumbersome work necessary before actually running an assessment. Furthermore, if you want to look at security controls, so initially once we deploy AttackIQ, maybe we want to do something along the lines of understanding our baseline. So running through security control baselines, this is where we start to cover different aspects within an infrastructure, whether it's perimeter based or being endpoint focused, or individual technologies like IPS, firewalls, DLPs, et cetera. Right. So once again, having a lot of flexibility here, being able to take scenarios such as DLP. In this case, we have exfiltrate zip file containing 1,000 credit cards. Well, maybe that's not something that we necessarily want, and forgive me, my dog's barking. Maybe that's not something that we necessarily want to utilize. So maybe we want to go and actually look at the scenario itself and see what kind of parameters we can start to modify here. Right. So we can go in and we can choose whether or not it's user provided or auto generated. Is this going to be encrypted or compressed? And how are we going to actually exfiltrate this data, right? Is it over HTTP, ICMP, DNS, email? So a lot of flexibility, a lot of robustness with regards to the scenarios themselves. But if we actually go in for times purposes and look at some of the assessments that have already been ran, first and foremost is TIC 3.0 testing, right? So ultimately why we're here and having this discussion. What we did was we built a template. We worked with ATARC and a lot of the technology partners associated within this working group, and we built a TIC 3.0 testing template. So I'm going to take you through a couple different things. One of which is identifying workflow, right? So once we had identified a template that we actually want to execute, what does a workflow look like from there? So first and foremost is a setup phase. And like I mentioned, the machines need to be online at the time of run. So this is where we go in, we select our makeup. Maybe I want to run this against an ATP environment versus on a carbon black, right? And this is just to showcase, maybe you're doing a bake-off or maybe not. Maybe you're just doing control testing and further enhancing your capabilities. The majority of the technologies that are out there do what they say they do, right? But it just may be one of those things where they're not configured correctly. So in this case, I have two machines that I want to run this against, and now I have 7 tests that are configured, right? One of which is PCAP replay. In this case, I would have to provide a PCAP file. So if I go in and I go to manage scenarios, now I see the PCAP replay. It's essentially going in, configuring that file, adding the PCAP file, etc. In this case, maybe I don't want to do that, right? Maybe I want to take this test away as a whole. So what I can do here is I can go in, I can remove the test. And like I said, this is just a template that we created. So once again, being able to manipulate as you see fit. So now we're good to go. All of our tests are configured properly. In the event that we want to sequentially move this, or based on how they're going to sequentially run, we can change and modify and drag and drop as well. But moving forward here, we'll say everything's good to go. We continue. And now we have a couple different options, right? One of which is actually running this template, right? So you can run this on an ad hoc manual basis. And by doing so, I'm not actually going to run this, but I just showcase a nice little disclaimer here, and that's we typically are going to trigger alerts, right? So once again, going back and lending itself back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, post-breach known TTPs that are being utilized that all map back to that governed body. So in this case, like I said, for your SOC, your CERT, your operators, your analysts, just letting them know that when we run through these set of scenarios, there may be events that are being triggered. Now, the cool thing too is that these events are actually being tagged as AttackIQ related events. So in the event that you have a SIM, a SOAR platform, et cetera, right, you have the ability to create dashboards that are only based on AttackIQ data. So you can further segment that out as well. Now, like I said, you have the ability to run this on demand, but more importantly, especially along the likes of doing continuous security validation, you can run this on a schedule. So I didn't run the TIC 3.0 testing. I have run others on a schedule that I'll showcase here in a moment. But you can go in, you can essentially run this on a hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly aspect, right? So hourly all the way down to the hour. We can do every 4 hours, depending on what your specific use case or SLA is here, you have the ability to do so. But more importantly, email the report, right? So not having to live within the console itself. Once I run through these, especially when I'm doing these maybe every 4 hours or so or daily, email me the report so I have something tangible that I can tuck away from a historical perspective, maybe for trending analysis, or maybe to provide to senior leadership to showcase, hey, there's an uptick or there's a downtick in how we're faring out with regards to these results. Now, if we start to look at the results, now we're breaking them out into a couple of different ways, right? So looking at from an overall combined perspective, right? Prevention and detection. So understanding that not all cybersecurity technologies that are out there provide prevention. There are some that provide detection, your IDSs, your EDR technologies. So, excuse me. So we further separate that too as well. So you can look at it from an overall prevention standpoint, what tests did we prevent versus not prevent. And it starts to give you a starting point as to, when we're doing mitigation remediation, where is it we should focus on the most? More so if we want to break this up into individual tests. So I showcased when I went through the setup phase, it showed every single test that was associated with this template. Now we can break it down into individual results. How do we fare out from an endpoint protection versus AV versus content filtering? But if we want to start looking at this data from a historical standpoint, actually, let me migrate to a different assessment that I've ran. So now if we're looking at it from a historical standpoint, now we can start to see trending analysis over time. How do we fare out yesterday, last week versus how are we doing today? Was there a patch update? Was there, did someone fat finger at the configuration changes that were necessary to give us proper visibility into this TTP, right? So we're showcasing it here as well. But like I said, more importantly, we're showcasing the outcome of these results. We're showcasing whether or not something was prevented and or not prevented, or same case with regards to detection. So we showcase the MITRE tactics and how these align, if they do align. And we also showcase how the user privileges that were ran, the asset that was ran against, et cetera. And if we really want to dive in here and start to look at the outcome of these results, especially ones that have detection findings, or maybe ones that don't, right? Now, this is where we're starting to show the openness of the platform itself. First and foremost, before we even go in and look at and start to analyze what it is, based on this event, maybe we want to look at the arguments associated, right? What is it that we tested against before we even start to understand the outcome here? or more so, what is it that we actually ran, right? So we have a nice little slide in wiki here that'll showcase why we ran this, the supported platforms, and this is subjective, right? Some of these techniques you'll see more granular data associated here on the right-hand side versus others. Nonetheless, though, we're providing you a way to up-level your analyst or just your skill set as a whole, whether you're tier 1, tier 3. But actually looking at the meat and potatoes behind this, right? So we see that this was prevented. We also see that this was detected. So in this case, we sent a request to Instagram. We see that their status code did not match. So therefore, we showcase this as being prevented. Now, regardless of prevented or unprevented, we're providing you mitigation recommendations. And much like the MITRE ATT&CK framework itself, we are not the governing body, especially in the case of mitigation recommendations. So you will always see us pointing to a Microsoft, TechNet, US Cert, CISA, FBI, et cetera. We'll always define that here within our references section. And once again, like I said, more importantly is when you actually do utilize the integration manager in the way to integrate your security stack to understand visibility here. Here we see that we have a Palo Alto alerts. We showcase the classification of the alert itself. And if we want to actually look at the raw data here, we could do so, right? So now we have the raw data associated with a Palo Alto event that was associated with this specific scenario itself. And then furthermore, we have the ability to create TIC 2.0 open IOCs. So in the case that you start to go in and you start to manipulate the parameters associated with a specific scenario or any of them, it's thereby going to change the outcome of the open IOCs that you're generating. So you can utilize this for opposition forces exercises. You can choose to not do a cleanup on the endpoint itself when you run through these scenarios, and you can allow your blue team to go in and start to train themselves and look for nefarious behavior or adversarial behavior based on any one of these indicators. And then just to close out the openness of the platform again, we showcase everything here as far as the outcome, but if you want to look behind the scenes and look at the logs associated, once again, openness of the platform, white box testing, right? We don't restrict anything. You can go in, you can look at the logs here as well to further understand what was taking place behind the scenes. Now, if we want to look at it from a heat map aspect too, right? So looking at it from a MITRE heat map perspective. So this is where we're starting to showcase, understanding that the adversaries are working from a left to right, and the defenders are operating from a right to left. So if we understand that we can minimize damage, all right, within these areas, and we can start to move further left, we understand that it's going to be, it's going to result in essentially your organization not ending up in the news. And not to self-FUD, we've seen that in the past, right? But if we can further quantify risk and map these back to maybe an RMF by way of our ability to do CMMC, NIST 853 or 800-171 controls, now we can take that data, the empirical data that we gleaned from an endpoint that we ran these set of scenarios against, and we can map them back not just to a MITRE ATT&CK heat map, but also map them back to a risk management framework as well. In any one of these, we can, once again, we can go in, we can look at the outcome here. If you want to look at the discovery and look at just the scenarios that are associated here, once again, we're showing you the historical results, but also showing you the outcome. So in this case, once again, now we have a Microsoft Defender ATP alert that showcases that there was detection, but not necessarily a prevention alert. So just real briefly, I'll showcase what that looks like here as well. So we're looking at Microsoft Defender ATP. Once again, we have two detections here, and it's showcasing classification, a nice little event description, but this is a little bit different than the Palo Alto, looking at it from a raw data standpoint. In this case, I can actually go over and look, this will submit a custom URI into the Microsoft Defender ATP platform, which I'm not going to showcase here, but just showcasing that this will allow that direct API integration based on that partnership with Microsoft to go in and start to look at the attack tree, understand the parent-child processes, maybe look at obfuscated scripts, things of that nature. But I think more importantly is the ability to create and build something tangible, right, outside of running these scenarios and these assessments. So in this case, we have a couple different reports, one of which is we can run a differential report. So we can start to compare runs against, how we did on December 17th versus how we're doing on January 7th. So now we're going to showcase and build a report on this. Once again, you have the ability to download. You can view it here. You can email this, like I said. But in this case, we can customize the logo here and provide you all the details associated. So we're showing you run A versus run B. We're showing you, the fact that we're trending upwards 2%. We're also showing you the assets and what their pass-fail rate is as well. And then we start to break that into individual scenarios, right? So like I said, you can start to utilize this, build upon this, and really start to understand from a mitigation standpoint, what is it that we need to focus on first and foremost. And speaking of which, if we wanted to generate a report that was more detailed in nature, we could do so again. So let's go in. I'll select the detailed report view. I'll look for any one of these runs. Let's just go with our last run. In this case, same thing, but different report. This is going to have a lot more meat behind it, right? This is going to allow you to pass this over to security engineering team and say, look, we ran this test. This is the outcome. Now we need to implement mitigation and perhaps rerun this test an hour later, a day later, a week later, whatever the case is, based on that automation. Furthermore, you also have the ability to select team members. So when I kicked this off, I said that we have the ability to restrict access to not only the platform itself, but we also have the ability to restrict access to the individual assessments that are being ran. So maybe we're running assessments against high value targets or individuals, and we don't want prying eyes to have access to the data. I can simply go in here. I can add a user. This is showing us our RBAC table here. I can add that user in. So in this case, if I were to add Stacy and myself would be the only ones who are able to look at this specific assessment. And then if we want to enable notifications, so once again, not living within the console itself, we kick off an assessment, we're automating this assessment, it's running every hour, day, week, etc. We can turn on notifications, and notifications come in the form of email, Slack, Jira, AWS. Right, and this is allowing us to not only generate notifications based on the outcome or the results, but also set a threshold. So maybe I don't want to be inundated every time we have a 65% pass rate, but if it drops below that 65%, or if it goes above that, I want to be notified. And you do so by simply setting the threshold here, naming the specific individuals or the distro group that you want to send this to. And then from there, you would have access to that email anytime it does exceed that threshold. Looking at the scenarios themselves, so like Stacey mentioned, we have over 2,000 scenarios, which sounds like a lot at first, and it is a lot. So actually, we have 2,400, right? But some of these are, we do have the ability to bring in IOC feeds as well. So if we're looking at specific UR rules or things of that nature, right? That's more looking at it from a signature perspective. But that's a small portion of our library. The majority of our library is 2,000 plus scenarios that are actually running adversarial emulation in the form of TTPs that have been, like I mentioned before, documented within the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So in this case, if we wanted to start to understand, well, we have 2,400 scenarios, but we want to really parse this out, right? So maybe we want to understand what is it that AttackIQ put out within the last 30 days that covers the Windows environment. That is not a custom scenario, meaning that I did not, as a user, manipulate any of the scenarios. And now I can start to filter this out. Now I'm down to 338 scenarios. But if I wanted to filter this out even more so, how many of those actually fall within the MITRE ATT&CK framework or fall within any one of these ransomware families or security controls? So by selecting any one of these, I can go in and start to further filter out any of these results. So I went from 2,400 down to 61. Now, if you want to actually look at the scenario itself, we can go in, we can look at the scenario, we can download the source code. Once again, this is fully open and available for your team to code against. It's Python derived. We also have a training that's associated with building your own scenarios as well. But here we showcase the scenario description. Why is this important? How are we actually going to play out this scenario? And then we get into the configuration phase, like I showcased earlier. Right? Now, the key thing here is that any changes that I make with regards to this scenario configuration, I cannot make any changes to the original content within the library. So I may go in here, I may fat finger, or maybe I want to change this to a bunch of, 300 or 3 million or whatever the case may be. When I go to actually save this, I have to save this as a carbon copy now. So, no worries with regards to a new operator, warfighter, analyst that's on the system. They're not going to do any harm to the system itself, albeit they're also not going to do any harm to the endpoints in which they're testing against. So that's a nice little feature that we have built in as far as guardrails are concerned. And also looking at this from a MITRE ATT&CK heat map perspective too. So I showcased the outcome as far as MITRE ATT&CK is concerned, but also looking at what is it that we have from a coverage standpoint, so maybe across Windows, if I want to change this to looking at Mac OS, or looking at from a cloud aspect, AWS versus Azure versus GCP. Right, so this is showcasing in a way that allows you to identify quickly if you're operationalizing the MITRE ATT&CK framework to really go in and understand what it is that we have coverage for. Now, in the event that we do not have coverage, you also have the ability, once again, like I said, to modify the existing scenarios, but you can also actually go through the scenario development wizard. And this will allow you to have access to our Slack community, our GitHub repo, and really start to code and develop your own in-house scenarios that are maintained by you, the customer. So we have a lot of documentation here. They'll walk you through all that and allow you to really build upon that. And then finally, from a documentation standpoint, and just for the wake of time, we have 15 minutes left here, showcasing that you're not going at this alone, right? We do have a comprehensive knowledge base here. Stacy did talk about the blueprints. So in the event that you want to utilize some of our blueprints, maybe you want to do security technology inventory blueprints, it's as simple as going here. And for the folks that are prior military like myself, this is more like a standard operating procedure, right? So in the event that we have new recruits or new folks join our team and they need to get up and operational within the AttackIQ platform, we built these blueprints, SOPs, if you will, like I said, to allow you that user to quickly go through by just simply reading the directions. Furthermore, too, if you want to, like I said, operationalize or utilize the API, we have a widely documented API tutorial that you walk you through, showcase the tools that are necessary, as well as showcase some of the requests and things that you can do within our open API framework. So in this case, if I want to get all assets, it would be as simple as just getting my token and running this command, and now I have command line access to pull that data and telemetry out of the AttackIQ platform. So Stacy, I know we have a lot to cover. We left some out, but in the wake of time, we've got 13 minutes left. Should we open this up for questions?
I think that's a great idea. Are there any questions on the line?
So just to remind the folks attending, be sure to ask any questions that you might have in the Q&A chat. Stacy and Jason, I know a couple have actually come through for me through email. So one of them just being, are you going to be able to share the slides with them? So I'm thinking you guys are okay with that, and I'll be sending those out if that's the case.
Absolutely. We're happy to share the slides.
Cool. So another question that came through is, what are some obstacles that you see within federal agencies in their adoption of TIC right now?
That's a great question. And I think it really comes down to organizational readiness. And with the COVID pandemic and everyone working from home, it's really put an impact on the various units being able to work together and collaborate in a more effective fashion. The cool thing about AttackIQ is we are vendor neutral. So we are able to help organizations plan and assess for how they would deploy TIC 3.0 by evaluating the current controls they have and then evaluating in apples to apples fashion before they make an investment in any new controls to ensure that when they deploy them in their environment, we can help make sure the fine tuning and adjustments that need to occur to make the interoperability with the rest of their security stack work optimally, and then set that as a baseline so that they can be notified near real time of any deviation to that baseline as they continue to run the program.
Sounds good. Thank you. Another question that was actually, it's a two-part question going off of the first one. So where do you see the future of government TIC adoption going?
I think with the increase in the remote work from home workforce, the trusted internet connection is going to be even more important than it was before COVID impacted and created the push to work from home. Specifically with the remote devices, and then the more users to manage. And, at AttackIQ, we feel, we're post breach. So we assume the users are the new boundary. The users are going to be the ones that are going to click things inadvertently and open yourselves up to allowing the adversaries to penetrate your infrastructure. So I definitely see TIC 3.0 becoming an even more important and pressing program for organizations to focus on to support the remote workforce.
Excellent, thank you. And lastly, the other question that came through my email for me was someone is asking, do you have any advice for any organizations that are at the very beginning of their TIC 3.0 journey?
I would say understanding your infrastructure and putting together a plan, and truly understanding, instead of doing a paper-to-paper evaluation, this is where we can help again with that apples to apples vendor neutral assessment. We have the TIC 3.0 template, so we can allow you to run that template against any controls that you look to be adding to help stand up your TIC 3.0 infrastructure in order to ensure that they're not going to impact or create any conflict with the rest of your infrastructure, and make sure that you're making the right investments, right? You're purchasing the tools that are going to provide the value you need for your organization. And what that means for you may not be the same for another organization. It really comes down to the other controls in your organization and how they interoperate together.
Great. Thank you so much. And then lastly, if there are people who have questions that want to reach out to you directly or at a later time when they're viewing this recorded version, what would be the best way to reach you all at?
Feel free to reach out to myself and Jason via email or over the phone. I'm happy to share our contact information slide again. If the way everyone can have our information and jot it down. I know I showed it really quickly before, so let me see if I can share that.
Sounds good. Actually, I can put you guys' addresses in the chat too for folks who are at their laptops.
Are you able to see the slide, folks?
Yes, looks good.
Great. I haven't seen any questions come through the chat. Do you have any questions, attendees? We're happy to answer anything you might have with regards to what we talked about today or the demonstration that Jason provided. And again, if you feel like talking to us offline in a sidebar, our contact information is there for you. We're both local in the DC metro area, and we have teams to support us for outreach across the country.
Sounds good. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been an awesome presentation, and I know so much work has gone into this. So it's been really great to be a part of the journey and see it all come together.
Absolutely. And we want to appreciate, just want to thank you guys. We appreciate you letting us be a part of the TIC 3.0 demo lab and working group to help the vendors that have been presenting their solutions to test and validate and baseline their solution against the scenarios that we've mapped in our framework to ensure that they are configured correctly to not create any additional conflict or vulnerabilities when an organization deploys it. So thank you all for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of the week, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year, everyone.